The 1970s marked a turning point in American educational history. While the years following Brown versus Board of Education promised equality on paper, in reality, black children encountered a very different world in classrooms, hallways, and schoolyards. Desegregation, the end of racial segregation in schools, had begun to take effect not just in law, but in daily life. But this change was not always smooth or fair. That on one hand, black children entering newly integrated schools gained access to better resources, larger libraries, and more diverse curricula. On the other, they faced an unwelcoming atmosphere, the conscious or unconscious biases of teachers, and the invisibility of their own stories and textbooks. When they boarded the school bus each morning, they weren't just going to class, they were going to prove who they were, to fight for belonging, standing in lunch lines, raising their hands in class, running on the sports field. They weren't just learning academics. They were learning resilience, courage, and identity. For black children in the 1970s, school was a place to learn not only knowledge, but also survival, solidarity, and pride. Here are the marks they left in the classrooms, hallways, and playgrounds of that era. The first days after desegregation. Strangers in a Strange Land, the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision rejected this separate but equal doctrine, but real integration didn't begin until the late 1960s and 1970s. For many black children, this meant walking through the doors of all-white schools for the first time. The experience could be both exciting and terrifying. Little Jamal enrolled in an all-white elementary school in Atlanta in 1972. As he walked toward the school building, clutching his mother's hand, he felt the curious stares from faces in the windows. Inside, the hallways were wider, the classrooms brighter. But no one smiled at him. His teacher, Mrs. Henderson, greeted him politely but distantly. The other children whispered and stared. At tea lunchtime, Jamal sat alone at a table. At his old school, he'd laughed with all his friends. Now, he just looked at his food. This new school offered better equipment, but it lacked warmth and belonging. Thousands of black children like Jamal, expecting the equality promised by desegregation, first had to face a cold welcome. The loss of black teachers. Missing guides, one tragic side effect of desegregation was the loss of thousands of black teachers. As schools merged, black schools were often closed and white schools were favored. In the process, black teachers were fired or demoted. Mrs. Carter had taught at a black school for 30 years. She wasn't just a teacher. She was a mentor, protector, and inspiration to her students. But in 1973, when her school closed, she found herself unemployed. Despite her age and experience, no new school would hire her. Her students didn't just lose a teacher. They lost someone who understood them, supported them, and told them, "You can do it. I see you." While many white teachers in the new schools were well-intentioned, they often didn't understand the cultural needs, history, or experiences of black children. In class, when black students asked questions or offered different perspectives, they were ignored or misunderstood. The absence of black teachers wasn't just a pedagogical loss. It was an emotional and cultural rupture. Invisible in textbooks, a one-sided history, 1970s textbooks told American history mostly from a white perspective. Slavery was glossed over in a few paragraphs. The civil rights movement was reduced to Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech. Black scientists, artists, activists, and leaders were either absent or buried in footnotes. Marcus sat in history class, reading about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. The textbook mentioned they owned slaves, but it was treated as a minor detail. Marcus wondered, what about my ancestors? Where were they? What did they do? How did they live? He found no answers. At home, his mother and grandmother told him about Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, W.B. Du Bois, and others. The local church held monthly programs on black history, teaching children their heritage. Black families took on the responsibility of filling the gaps left by schools. They knew that a community that doesn't know its own history risks losing its identity. School lunches, shared tables, divided seats. The school cafeteria was where social hierarchies became most visible. Even though desegregation was the law, students still tended to sit with their own racial groups. Keisha carried her tray, mac and cheese, green beans, and a hard cookie into the lunchroom. She saw black kids at one table, white kids at another. A few Latino and Asian students had their own groups. Keisha sat with her black friends. They laughed, shared neighborhood news, and tasted each other's food, but sometimes Keisha looked at the other tables. Those kids wore nicer clothes, and their homemade sandwiches looked tastier. They sometimes looked back, but none dared to cross over. The cafeteria was a place for both nourishment and social learning. The most important lesson, though, was that a silent but powerful wall of division still stood. The school bus experience. Two sides of busing, transporting black children to white neighborhood schools and vice versa to achieve desegregation, was one of the most controversial education policies of the 1970s. Every morning at 6 a.m., Tyrone waited for the school bus in front of his house. The bus picked up kids from his black neighborhood, then drove to a white suburb on the other side of town. The ride took over an hour. Tyrone watched as the narrow streets of his neighborhood gave way to wide, grassy lawns on the bus. The kids were tired but talked, sang, and played games. The long ride became a bond of solidarity. But at the destination, some white families protested the buses, holding signs and shouting. Tyrone was scared the first time he saw it. Over time, he got used to it, but the unease never left. Busing aimed to create equality, but for black children, it often felt like entering a battlefield every morning. Pride and belonging in black schools before desegregation, all black schools, despite their limitations, offered a strong sense of community. In these schools, children felt safe, understood, and supported. Lincoln Elementary was in a black neighborhood. The building was old, and supplies were limited, but the walls were covered with portraits of Harriet Tubman, George Washington Carver, and Langston Hughes. Principal Johnson stood at the door every morning, greeting each child by name. Teachers taught not just academics, but character, respect, and community values that on Fridays, the whole school gathered in the gym to sing, recite poetry, and celebrate achievements. The children weren't just students, they were family. As these schools closed in the 1970s, that warmth and security were lost. The black community fought for better education for their children, but in the process, they lost a cultural home. Sports and physical education, a field of visible success. Sports were one of the few areas where black children could showcase their talents and earn respect. Basketball, football, and track were places where racial barriers could sometimes be overcome. Jerome was the star of the basketball team. Quiet and reserved in class, he came alive on the court. His speed, jumps, and shots led his team to victory. His white teammates respected him. On the field, skills spoke louder than color. But after the game, in the locker room or school hallways, that bond weakened. Jerome was alone again. Sports offered temporary equality, but didn't change social reality. Still, for black children, sports were a chance to express themselves, show their achievements, and sometimes find a path to the future. Figures like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Arthur Ashe inspired this generation. Discipline and unfair punishment. Double-standard statistics showed that in the 1970s, black students were disciplined more often than white students. The same behavior could be seen as aggression in black children and energy in white children. Malik eagerly raised his hand to answer a question in class. The teacher ignored him. Malik tried again, this time saying, "I know." The teacher, Mrs. Williams, gave him a stern look. "Malik, you never follow the rules. Go to the principal's office." Malik was shocked. His white classmate Tommy did the same thing, but wasn't warned. These small but constant injustices built up anger and disappointment in black children. They felt constantly watched, afraid every action would be misinterpreted. Parents told them, "Be careful, stay quiet, be perfect." They knew the cost of mistakes was much higher for black children than for white ones. Art and music classes. Spaces for creativity and expression. Art and music classes were valuable spaces where black children could express their cultural identity. But these programs were often the first to be cut due to budget constraints. Aaliyah loved music class. Mr. Thompson, one of the few black teachers at school, taught her piano. One day, she played a gospel song from church. Mr. Thompson smiled. "Wonderful, Aaliyah. You're bringing your culture into your music. That's art." But in 1975, the principal announced the music program was canceled due to budget cuts. Mr. Thompson transferred to another school. Aaliyah was left with only math, science, and English. The creativity and expression inside her had no place at school. For many black children, art and music were ways to find their voice. Losing these classes wasn't just a program cut. It was a restriction on their identity. Field trips, Windows to the World field trips gave black children a chance to explore beyond their neighborhoods. But access and quality depended on the school's resources. Jefferson Elementary, in a black neighborhood, could only afford one field trip a year. In 1974, Mrs. Davis's class went to the City Museum. The children excitedly boarded the bus. They saw dinosaur skeletons, ancient Egyptian exhibits, and the planetarium. Deshaun had never been in such a big building before. His eyes widened, his mouth dropped open. A white school across town went on 3 museum trips, a theater play, and a nature camp that year. Resource inequality limited black children's opportunities to discover the world. Still, these rare trips were unforgettable. Seeing history in a museum or live animals at the zoo expanded their imaginations and inspired new dreams. The library, gateway to knowledge and imagination. School libraries were gateways to knowledge for black children. But the books on the shelves rarely reflected their stories. Angela checked out books from librarian Ms. Rodriguez every week. But the shelves were full of stories with white characters. Angela wanted to read about a hero who looked like her, a black family story. One day, she found Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. She caught her breath. For the first time, she read about a girl like herself. She felt the pain, the struggle, the growth. When Angela finished the book, she wanted more. Ms. Rodriguez showed her Langston Hughes, James Baldwin, and others. These books changed Angela's world. She saw herself, felt understood, and felt strong. For black children, literature wasn't just reading. It was finding identity and affirmation, friendships and social dynamics. Building bridges across races. Desegregation created opportunities for cross-racial friendships. But these relationships were often fragile due to social pressures and family prejudices. Jamal and Tommy became partners for a science project. As they worked together, they discovered shared interests: baseball, comic books. They started playing together after school. For a while, they built a good friendship. But one day, Tommy's father found out his son was spending time with Jamal. He told Tommy, "Don't be friends with those kids. They're different from us." Tommy was torn. The next day at school, he was cold to Jamal. Jamal didn't understand, but he was deeply hurt. These experiences taught black children that trust was hard, and identity could always be an issue. Still, some friendships endured, building bridges for a more equal future. Graduation ceremonies, moments of pride, and hope. High school graduation was a momentous celebration for black families. It wasn't just an individual achievement. It was a communal victory. In 1978, LaTanya was graduating. Her family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, all gathered in the auditorium. LaTanya wore her white gown and cap. When her name was called, her family stood up, cheering and clapping. LaTanya took her diploma, tears in her eyes. After the ceremony, there was a big celebration at home: fried chicken, macaroni salad, sweet potato pie. Her grandmother hugged her. "I'm so proud of you, child. You represented us." LaTanya planned to go to college. She would be the first in her family. Graduation wasn't just an ending, it was a new beginning. For the black community, every graduation was a victory over history. School uniforms and dress codes. Between individuality and conformity, some schools enforced uniforms to promote discipline and equality, while others allowed free dress. For black children, clothing was an important part of identity. In 1973, Marcus's school introduced a uniform policy: white shirt, navy pants, black shoes. Marcus missed his colorful clothes, his afro, and his platform shoes. The uniform made everyone look the same, but Marcus felt it suppressed individuality. Some friends tried to express themselves within the uniform: colorful socks, pins, hairbands. When teachers noticed these violations, they gave out discipline slips. Dress codes, though seemingly neutral, often targeted black children's cultural expressions. Afros were called untidy, dashikis, inappropriate. These policies taught children to conform to white norms. Support. Building bridges, black families were deeply committed to their children's education. When schools didn't provide enough support, they created their own resources. Mrs. Johnson attended every PTA meeting. She spoke up about black students' needs, demanded more diversity in textbooks, and called for cultural sensitivity training for teachers. At first, her voice was ignored. But when she joined with other black parents, they became a force. In the neighborhood, churches and community centers offered homework help, reading clubs, and mentorship. Black history classes and weekend schools filled the gaps in formal education. Children learned to cope with school challenges through the support they received at home and in the community. Parents learned to talk to teachers, negotiate with school administrators, and even take legal action. In the 1970s, the black community fought a constant battle to protect their children's right to education. The school experiences of black children in the 1970s were filled with pain, struggle, but also resilience and pride. Desegregation brought legal equality, but real integration and justice required a much longer journey. The children of this era learned not just math and history in classrooms, but also survival, resistance, and identity. With the support of teachers, families, and the community, they overcame barriers. They graduated, went to college, built careers. But they never forgot the cold hallways, the ignored raised hands, the absence in textbooks. These memories made them stronger, more aware, and more determined. Today, educational inequities persist. School funding, curriculum, discipline policies all still reflect racial injustice. But the generation of the 1970s showed us how to fight. Families, communities, and activists continue to advocate for children's rights. Education is not just a tool for individual success. It's a means for social transformation.